This is Out of Bounds. This is Out of Bounds. It is your weekly spot for the wacky, weird, and wild, downright odd in the sports world. That's me, O'Brien, doing her facial gimmick. That's me, John Alba, doing my I'm going to drink some whiskey gimmick here in just a few minutes. Welcome to the Know Your News Network. What's going on, Mia? How we doing Monday? Busy day for you?
What's that?
Busy day for you?
Busy day indeed. Up at the crack of dawn for Jaguars practice, although as much as you and I are not necessarily early risers, John, that's probably a good thing because we currently have a feels like of 1:14 here in lovely Northeast Florida. So better to get out there early, although I will give a little PSA to our listeners, to our viewers. They tell you, you got to hydrate. You got to make sure you got your electrolytes. Gatorade was invented by the Florida Gators down the road in Gainesville. What they don't tell you, even if you're 125 pounds, don't skip meals during training camp.
Oh.
Yeah, because that's what got me today. I wasn't dehydrated. It was the blood sugar, John.
Oh, you gotta keep. I mean, that's a huge part of it. You got to keep the energy up. You got to keep the
calorie intake. Yeah, I just did not see it coming. Felt like, well, hey, I hydrate. I drink a gallon of water every day. Had a late lunch, early dinner yesterday. And so then was like, I had a little snack before bed, protein shake this morning. I'll be good. And oh yeah, after 3 hours in the sun, all of a sudden you're like,
you're doing that wrong, girl. Come on. You're supposed to be a veteran at this.
I'm telling you. And we get to stand in the shade now, thanks to the beautiful new Miller Electric Center. So, I'm like, hey, I got a little bit of shade, some breeze. Nope. Not when it's 114 out.
I know Tony Khan. I can put in a good word if you need something. Okay?
Hey, listen, he keeps those buildings at about 55 degrees compared to my house, which is 71 right now. I need the 55.
Okay. All right. Take it for what it is. We are here for another edition of Out of Bounds, and we love chatting with you guys. We want to hear from you. Go to kynchat.com. Leave us your super chat to get your comment read on air. Or if you're just watching via YouTube, you head on into YouTube, you leave us a super chat. We'll read your comment on air. You can give us some input as well, and we'll have a lot of fun along the way. Mia, we are back at it this week. It's time to drink. What are we cheersing to?
We are cheersing to, that's a great question. I will say this. We will cheers to, according to Chris Collinsworth, since I don't see this on our rundown today. Actually, we do. We are going to circle to Aaron Rodgers, but we're going to cheers to Zach Wilson. We are going to cheers to the fact that he, according to Chris Collinsworth, well, that's improvement as he slipped and slid his way for a failed third down conversion.
Ready? ASMR. There it is. Cheers to Zach Wilson. Better things ahead this year as he sits on the bench. Mm-hmm. You want a bold prediction? I'll give you a bold prediction.
Yeah, hit me. By the way, I really thought I didn't see Zach Wilson's name. I forgot we do have Aaron Rodgers in the rundown tonight.
Zach Wilson, even with Aaron Rodgers as the starting quarterback for the Jets, this year, Zach Wilson will start at least one game. There's my bold prediction.
Well, probably if they wrap up the division.
That's not why. I think Aaron Rodgers misses a game or two this year because of injury. That's just my hunch.
That is a hot take. Man alive. So don't hit a man while he's down.
Thankfully he's a foot ahead of us. Anyway, let's go over to baseball here. And you're talking about hitting a man while he's down. What about while he's standing up, Mia? This was absolutely crazy. Probably the wildest thing that happened in the sports world this week. Cleveland Guardians third baseman Jose Ramirez and Chicago White Sox shortstop Tim Anderson were both ejected from Saturday's game after exchanging punches during the bottom of the sixth inning. It led to a brawl in which both managers were ejected as well. So Ramirez slid safely into second on a double. He beat Anderson's tag, and while on the ground, Ramirez began arguing with Anderson. He pointed at him as he stood up, and these guys just threw down their gloves, circled up. It was like celebrity deathmatch. Let's get it on. And Anderson, he put up his fists. He was ready for a fist fight. The two took swings at each other. Ramirez socked Anderson, sent him down to the ground. This was absolutely wild. Anderson's gone 6 games. Ramirez has gone 3 games as a result of suspensions. So I ask you, Mia O'Brien, does baseball need more fist fighting to inject some life into the game here?
Let's begin with Tim Anderson when he took the gloves off.
Look at this picture. Look at this.
The taking of the glove off was that was the best part. Like, forget about connecting. It was when the glove physically came off. I don't know if I've ever seen that in baseball quite like that, where it was a one-on-one showdown. Listen,
You remember the Runit Odor Jose Batista fist fight at
yeah.
second
Oh,
base
true,
2
Jose.
years ago?
Yeah.
I mean, there was a sucker punch in that too. This was the closest thing we've had to that since.
That was the closest thing we've had to it. But like I said, the glove, drop it. Truly dropped the gloves.
They like circled each other, and it was like, all right, here we go.
Right. No, it was fantastic. I mean, here's the thing. It was fantastic.
Going at it here.
You don't want to, like, it's not what you want, in the words of one of our favorite cult heroes. But the reality is people go to hockey games to watch people fight. And while that's obviously a much more physical sport than baseball, and it often by nature and also by design is incorporated into actual game play. I'm not sure you really want a fight a game, but listen, show some character, show some spunk. It showcases that these guys aren't just worried about their hamstring like Giancarlo Stanton, who was afraid to run home the other day and go full speed. And so I appreciate that. What I don't appreciate is the AL Central, which is quite frankly repulsive.
I mean, someone should knock out the AL Central.
Right, exactly. Someone sucker punched the whole division. And that's with all due respect to my friends up in Cedar Rapids, Colonels, Minnesota Twins land. Because first of all, you're looking at a division, which includes definitely the Chicago White Sox and to an extent the Cleveland Indians, in which all five Guardians. Sorry.
Come on, we're like 3 years into this.
Also, when I was there last summer, I would say Guardians, and every Ohio resident I talked to said Indians. We don't call them the Guardians. Anyways, I digress. The point I was getting at, all five of those ball clubs, John, all five of them in the last 5 years have had different points where they had a top 3 farm system in the majors.
Yeah.
Top 3. What happened?
Poor leadership, poor management, players just absolutely not rising to the occasion. I mean, look, this isn't a super chat, but I'll read it. Armand says Anderson took that right hook like he takes a strikeout looking. The absolute total spiral of Tim Anderson from an all-star last year into...
Wait. Can we read these numbers, John? Because these numbers are absurd. I didn't realize how drastic he fell off a cliff.
Sure.
335 in 2019, 322 in the shortened 2020 season. That's what Tim Anderson batted. 309, 301, 244.
Yeah.
He also had 4 seasons of double-digit home runs. He has 1.
Yeah, he's got 1. And I think, if I recall, his WAR, I think he's like a minus 1.6 player. So he's actually costing the White Sox games at this juncture, which is pretty surreal considering there was a period of time where people were talking about this guy being a face of the game here at some point, and that has not happened and likely will not happen at any point. This was so much fun, though, Mia, because it broke the decorum, the unwritten rules of baseball. And every now and then when you get a brawl, it can act as this lightning rod for a team. It's not going to happen for any team in the AL Central. But I remember I was reading Jack Curry's 1998 Yankee book, and they were talking about the Armando Benitez-Tino Martinez brawl, that when the Yankees teammates realized they had Tino's back and Darryl Strawberry runs into the opposing dugout and takes a swing, that's when they realized as a unit, hey, we're a force and we want to beat every single team that we face by several runs every single game. So in a real world, you would hope that that would serve as motivation. But the reality is the AL Central is just absolute garbage this year.
Which brawl do you prefer? Pedro Martinez and Don Zimmer, or Jason Varitek and Alex Rodriguez?
I mean, I think the surrealness of the 2003 brawl where Don Zimmer just gets...
How old was he? 83?
He was in his 80s, yeah. And he just gets yeeted by Pedro. Just one of the more surreal things you're ever going to see in a sporting event. But I'll tell you, I thought that it injected a little bit of life into the game between two bad teams. And if we saw this every now and then, I wouldn't hate it. Honestly, 6 games and 3 games, that's not that bad.
Show us that you're alive. You have a pulse. This isn't just, sticking to gentlemen's rules. And yeah, I actually, the suspension, and I see some of our listeners are commenting as such on YouTube about it. It really wasn't all that much. Like, correct me if I'm wrong. Pedro, Veritek, A-Rod, Jose Bautista, those guys incurred a much more severe suspension. Am I wrong?
I'd have to look it up what they were, but let's see. Jose Bautista suspension fight. And Ronald Odor was a big part of it too. No, Batista just got 1 game.
Really?
Ronald Odor got 8 games.
I mean, compared to what you would get in the National Football League for fighting, I mean, you probably get a game or a half there.
It's different because that's not
the nature of
2 games, but
right.
Yeah, no, I'm about it, and I just think it's about time that we see a little life come out of the AL Central, because I'm not expecting a whole lot of life to come out of it for the rest of the season, quite frankly. We got to start resuscitating that division. There used to be quality teams there that would make deep runs late 90s, early 2000s, and then it just went off a cliff. So
Jim Tomei is very sad seeing the state of the
I don't know
AL
what's
Central.
going on there in the Central. I mean, it's pretty surreal that everyone is so bad.
I didn't realize the Royals are only like 7 games above the A's. I didn't realize it was that bad.
Oh, no, they stink. I mean, they really stink.
And it stinks because they got Bobby Witt, who's one of the most exciting young players in the game, and he's on this god-awful team.
I mean,
but that's the nature of the Royals.
You've got the Yankees, who are 12 games back in the AL East. They would be a half game back of first place in the AL Central right now.
And that's only by virtue of they all beat up on each other.
Yeah. So
not great.
Of that what you
speaking of injecting life, there's a lot of life in this man, even though he's a little bit old. Both of these gentlemen, actually. At 73, Dusty Baker, no, we'll get to Joe Biden in a second. Dusty Baker became the oldest manager to ever win a World Series when the Astros won it all last year. Monday, today, White House celebration for the team. Joe Biden, the president of the United States, says he could relate to Dusty. Quote, "People counted you out saying you were past your prime. Hell, I know something about that," Biden joked. Everyone was thrilled to see Dusty finally win the big one. John, who is an athlete or coach you'd like to see finally get the job done? Any sport. Who's your guy?
Can we just laugh real quick about how much taller Joe Biden is than Jose Altuve?
Oh, my God. I didn't even notice that. Taller than a lot of those guys. I hate to say it.
I mean, yeah, but especially Jose Altuve. I think.
Are we gonna do like can we superimpose Joe Biden into Aaron Judge on the meme?
Yeah, there you go. That would work.
There you go.
That would suffice. All right, let's think about this. Players or coaches who have not won the big one, but have come close or just haven't been on a team that's been good enough.
I've got 2, so you better come ready.
Instinctually, the first name that comes to mind for me is Mike Trout.
Yeah.
Because Mike Trout is going to go down as one of the greatest players of all time. And he has come nowhere close to even competing for a championship.
Well, that's the thing with Mike Trout. I would like for him to just make the postseason.
Yeah.
World Series would also be nice, but I would just like for him to make the postseason.
So, like, we're talking about a guy here who it's like, what? I think in the NBA, I'm probably going with a guy like Chris Paul.
Oh, okay.
Who long chasing titles, has had many opportunities, widely regarded as one of the greatest point guards of all time. And I don't think his teams have necessarily lost due to him in the past. I think he belongs on that list. I'd love to hear yours.
So I will also go to the NBA. I will go for another guy who actually finally broke through and made a made a championship round. 36 years young. This was in his 16th season. That is, of course, one Al Horford, who finally makes it to the championship round with the Boston Celtics. But, of course, they could not close the deal. And, of course, he does have ties to the Florida area, in which I cover now. He's a guy he's an immaculate grid answer machine, but just seems like such a good guy who has been on competitive teams, John. It's not like he's been on crappy teams his entire career, but it just, for whatever the reason, much like Chris Paul, hasn't been able to get to that championship round. And even when he finally got there, they weren't able to win it all. My second pick is in the NFL and a little bit more off the radar. And again, this is a personal pick for me, and that's Calais Campbell. He is a guy who, when Canton comes calling and the voters have to look at his resume, I believe he has a Hall of Fame resume.
But he might need the title to put him over the top.
He needs to put him over the top. And what's sad about it is, by many accounts, when he was traded from Jacksonville to Baltimore, Lamar Jackson was coming off of an MVP season, and the prevailing thought was they are in their window. He has a chance to win a championship and add to that legacy and affirm himself as a Hall of Famer. And obviously they haven't been able to get it done. So he goes to Atlanta this offseason. I don't really know what's going to happen there. But he's a guy that I just would hate for him to be kept out of the Hall solely because, well, he never won the big one. He never made it to the championship game. Because while certainly it's something that adds to your resume, it's fascinating to me, and as great as his career was, for as short as it was, to see a guy like Terrell Davis, who certainly was dominant for 5 seasons in Denver, but one of the prevailing criteria when he was admitted into the Hall of Fame a few years ago was, well, he did win a Super Bowl, so it's okay. So he put up these numbers. It was only 5 seasons, but he did go to a Super Bowl. And so that's where I see these other guys like Calais, where look how long their careers have been. They've been productive well into their 30s, but you didn't win the big one. So therefore we can't count you.
It really is amazing when you look at these lists of Hall of Famers or great players who never won a championship across any of these sports. Because I do think for the superstars, you don't really think about it that much because you're like, these guys are good enough on their own merit. Their legacies speak for themselves. But then you get into those borderline candidates for a Hall of Fame induction, and all of a sudden that Hall of Fame ring, or that championship ring rather, actually starts to carry some weight, right? It really starts to mean something. Like for a guy like Henrik Lundqvist, will it matter that he didn't win a championship with the Rangers? Probably not. But if he did, you're saying this guy's a top 3 goalie of all time. Right. But I think because he didn't, maybe you're saying, well, maybe he's top 5, top 10 instead. And I do think that not winning the big one really does carry some weight. Someone in baseball I'd love to see win it. It ain't happening this year for him. Buck Showalter. Yeah. I mean, Buck Showalter has come close. And if 95 didn't happen and 94 didn't happen, rather, the Yankees might have had a chance at winning the World Series, and they were the best team in the American League at that point. And for all we know, they could have broken through and he finally wins one. So it is really interesting to go back and look. I mean, a guy like Ichiro never won a World Series. True. The greatest hitter of all time, maybe, never won a World Series. It's Dan Marino never won a Super Bowl. But when
I almost put him down as an immaculate grid answer today for the Miami Dolphins, and then I went, wait a second.
But when Dan Marino, when he goes into the Hall of Fame, no one's questioning, oh, he didn't win a Super Bowl, so he's not a Hall of Famer. It's obvious, right? Like he's a Hall of Famer.
I think part of that is the position he played. Look at the position that.
But now I think quarterbacks, there is an expectation that you need to win the big one to be considered among that elite group. Whereas in the past, when you had the Dan Marinos, like I think Dan Marino would have been a Hall of Famer on his own merit, but I don't think it would have been as unanimous today with him as it was back then.
So let me give you an example. If Kurt Warner doesn't win a Super Bowl and then go to another one with a different franchise, does he get into the Hall of Fame as easily as he did?
Not in my opinion.
There it is.
Not in my opinion. I mean, he was a fantastic quarterback and a great story, but if he didn't win the 99 Super Bowl, then I totally see a much more difficult path for him to get there. I do think championships matter in sports. I do think they do. And yes, in team sports, it's harder. It's undoubtedly harder, but they do carry some weight. And we got some good suggestions in the chat, guys. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Leave us a super chat. Just drop them there on YouTube, and we'll read your comments throughout the show because there are so many out there, too, that still exist in the realm. All right, Mia, let's keep going to a team that did not win a championship. That is the U.S. women's national team. Oh boy, yeah, this was rough here. The United States knocked out of the Women's World Cup after a 5-4 penalty shootout defeat to Sweden in the round of 16 this weekend. The earliest exit ever in World Cup play for the U.S. women's national team. Is this the biggest underachievement for an American team in international play, Mia?
It's only to be outdone by their male counterparts not making the 2018 World Cup, John. That's as close as I can come up with. This is something that many predicted would come. Some thought it would come in 2019. They thought that would be the turning point, the seminal point in women's soccer globally, where the rest of the world caught up with the U.S. But the difference between 2019 and 2023 was in 2019, that group of women had that dog in them, for lack of a better term. They were playing for something more. The standard was the standard. It was win the whole thing or nothing. It's win or die. Like, that was literally the way that they viewed that. And part of that was because they were simultaneously fighting for equal pay. This joke has been made several times, and I hate that I'm making it, but the reality is, well, you got equal pay, and now you have an equal finish to the men's side, being ousted in the round of 16. The terrible irony of that. Of course, that's independent, though, of the off the field activism of the women's national team. And that's, obviously there's lots of people who have their feelings about Megan Rapinoe, but I'm really glad Eddie on YouTube, one of our commenters, is pointing it out, how Carly Lloyd was 100% correct what she said about this team when they simply tied in the final game of the group stage and celebrated about it.
Yeah.
Right. Which is, the standard is the standard. If you actually play for the United, and that's where, this notion of, well, the United States takes for granted that they have been the world power in women's soccer for our entire lives, for 30 years. That is certainly true. And part of that is because of the accessibility and by nature of having feeder programs and having youth soccer dating back to the 1970s, thanks to the Title IX movement. But the reality is that those women in 2019 and 2015, they looked at the standard of those women who fought in the 90s and said they would expect nothing less than a championship. So I cannot expect anything less than a championship.
Yeah.
And so,
I mean, I think one pushback is just with soccer in general, especially over the years, it is much more of a world sport where it's not hard for people to get good at it. And I think
especially if you invest the money in it.
Yeah. And I think internationally, the standard has raised across the board for women's soccer. So the U.S. might have been ahead, but I think other people are starting to catch up. And that's much like how the rest of Major League Baseball is caught up to the Yankees finally. I think the rest of the league or the rest of the country's catching up.
Honestly, it's hilarious that you bring up that, because I actually said it to, Coach Dave Campo, former head coach of the Cowboys, who works with me here in Jacksonville. He said it to me. He said, he goes, I'm not a huge U.S. women's soccer fan, but knowing what I do and knowing how much of a diehard Yankee fan I am, I see some parallels. They refuse to straight up rebuild. You have an old guard and a new guard, and you're convinced you're going to be able to get them to gel together. And you're never going to have to reset the roster, that it will just you don't have to reset it. It's just going to work out. That's what this U.S. women's national team roster was. It was, you still had old guard that you wouldn't let go of, and you wouldn't fully lean into the new guard. And thus you had that disconnect, and it was never going to be put together on the field, especially when you have a coach with some very questionable coaching decisions throughout the duration of their 4 games.
There. I'll tell you what, I'll give you one team that I think underachieved more than this team. And even though they did walk away with a bronze medal, I think it's got to be the 2004 men's United States men's basketball team.
Yep.
So we're talking about Greece here. I'm going to read you this roster. This team came in 3rd place. Allen Iverson, Stephon Marbury, Dwayne Wade, Carlos Boozer, Carmelo Anthony, LeBron James, Emeka Okafor, Sean Marion, Amari Stoudemire, Tim Duncan, Lamar Odom, and Richard Jefferson. And that team came in 3rd place. That's when most of those guys were in their prime. I mean, let's talk about this. Hall of Famers: Allen Iverson, Dwayne Wade, Carmelo Anthony, LeBron James, Tim Duncan, a couple bubble players on there as well. That team came in 3rd place. Argentina coming in first. Carlos Delfino and Manu Ginobili that year were absolutely insane. Italy came in 2nd place. I remember that being a big, big deal when the U.S. men, and they haven't lost since. Because I think that spurred some changes in them.
Beyond them not having lost since, what happened in 2008? It was a mission.
Yeah.
Kobe Bryant and company were on a mission. Mm-hmm. They would not be denied. And that's the difference. I just, we use, the dog in them, but it's true. If I don't see fight, like I said this to everybody who, noted that outside of the New York Yankees, in terms of my fandom of pro sports, it's pretty much the Yankees and it's the U.S. women's national soccer team. And the apathy ran very thick for me these last few weeks because it just didn't look like they wanted to be there. So why would I want to watch them, quite frankly? That group in 2019, they clearly wanted to be there. They wanted this nation to embrace them. This group, I don't know if they just didn't want to play in 50-degree New Zealand or like what the deal was, but it looked like they didn't want to be there. And for me as a fan, why would I want to watch? If you're not going to have a pure joy and love for the game and be competitive and have that fire that made me fall in love with watching this team as a young girl in the 90s, then why am I going to invest any of my fandom in you? And that's very unfortunate because beyond the wins, that's what this program, because it is a program, that's what this program has meant to people for 30 plus years. And so my hope is that this is like 2007, which was a similar, or 2008, excuse me. No, 7 was the World Cup, 8 was the Olympics. Similar situation. The Fab Five, Mia Hamm, Judy Foudy, Brandy Chastain and company. They had all Julie Foudy, Joy Fawcett, Brandy Chastain, Christine Lilly. They all retired after the 2004 Olympics. And then it was this weird period of transition where you still had Abby Wambach. You had Heather O'Reilly was a young player coming up. You were about to enter into the Alex Morgan experience, and they couldn't decide because even like Brianna Scurry was still the keeper in the 2007 World Cup, and they couldn't decide if they were in or out with the old or the new guard. And that lit a fire under them. And while certainly they didn't win the World Cup in 2011, and then there's, the drought was what, 16 years long when they finally won it all again in 2015. At the very least in 2011, with that infamous Abby Wambach header in the quarterfinals against Brazil, they showed that fight that we hadn't seen since 99 and 03 to an extent, which was the final World Cup for Mia Hamm and company. And so, yeah, it's disappointing, but I hope it's a wake-up call. That's all I can say, because the rest of the world is coming. And, to your point about if you have money, you're able to create women's soccer because it's an affordable game compared to lacrosse or football.
Yeah.
The reality is we're looking at a situation, John, like women's basketball, where these women, look at Lindsey Horan, look at Mal Pugh, they are getting paid more money to go play overseas than they are to play club ball in the United States of America. And so they'll continue to do that. And those countries will continue to develop players that they identify at a young age, just like they do on the men's side, and bring them up through the feeder programs.
It's a long-term investment in essentially you get what you pay for, right? At the end of the day, that's what it boils down to.
I think Vlaco will be gone, though.
I would agree with that.
By next week's time, they'll do their review or whatever. It was already time, despite the fact that he was brought on after Jill Ellis retired after the 2019 World Cup. In my opinion, it was only a matter of time. So unfortunately, it never really came together. And so it'll be curious to see who Cindy Parlow, a member of that 99 team, now the president of the U.S. Soccer Federation, who they tab to lead the women's team into this next era.
I should shoot a text. I got to be pretty close with Tiffany Roberts-Saheda.
Yeah.
On those teams. She's over at UCF. And we did a whole story about the reunion of that team not that long ago. And just, the vast difference in how things are today versus then with this team. It's pretty staggering. But of course, people are always going to be a little nostalgic too. That's just the nature of sports. That's how they work. That's how it runs.
But that's why 2019 was so great, John, because it was such a throwback. They were the 99 team 20 years removed, just changed the names. Michelle Akers was Megan Rapinoe in terms of being that veteran leader, but who still had some game left. You had a young goal scorer in their prime and Alex Morgan to Mia Hamm, and they wanted to be in Paris. They wanted to make the final. They just didn't look like they wanted to be there the last 3 weeks.
I would agree with that, Mia. And, you could say that the team was rolling over with the let's call a spade with reality on the horizon, acknowledging what was ahead. Seems to be a similar position.
Oh God.
Not.
Here's the difference, John. The U.S. women's national team will rise again. The Pac-12 will not. Oregon, Washington, Arizona State, Utah, on the heels of Colorado already saying goodbye, all out of the Pac-12. And that leaves Cal, Stanford, Oregon State, and Wazoo as the only schools currently slated to play in the conference in 2024-2025. Is conference realignment just the best or just the worst thing that has happened to college sports?
I'll tell you, it's really bittersweet, isn't it? Because you think back even 20 years ago, 15 years ago, we were really truly in the heyday of conference competition where there was so much more parity spread across these different conferences. The Pac-12 was loaded in most sports, especially football. Pardon me, with seeing what USC was doing at the time and kind of the rise of Oregon in football. Then I'd always heard, right? Like you'd hear this all the time. Once TV money gets in the way, conferences are all done, and people are like, "Yeah, that'll happen down the line." I mean, it's here. It has happened. TV money has completely, radically changed the way the college sports landscape changes. I mean, listen, I don't think conference deaths are the worst thing for the sport, so long as we still provide opportunities for the people that are left on the outside of these. If we are not finding ways to provide ample opportunities, then we're looking at a problem. I'll use college football as an example. The expanded playoff is going to provide more opportunities that for a team like one of those four remaining schools, that should they find a way to get really good, they'll have a path to competing, even if they're left on the outside as far as conference realignment is concerned. Yeah, you could argue when the Big East dissolved, a team like Cincinnati or a team like Louisville, probably a school, I should say, like those, probably should not have been left behind and stuck in the AAC. And I hate to use it that way, but let's be real here, right? As long as we are finding ways to still incorporate these teams, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world, especially as now money is going into these conferences. And now we're seeing ways for players to make profit off of that.
If you're an Oregon State fan or a Wazoo fan, at this current juncture, it looks like those four schools we just listed will be absorbed into the Mountain West. There is a potential road for Cal and Stanford to join the Big Ten down the line, potentially Oregon State to go to the Big 12 alongside San Diego State.
Why do we even have numbers, Mia? Why do we even have numbers?
Right, right. It's like 20 teams in a conference. I don't understand it. You don't even get the bulk of like this whole notion. This is my favorite. So the Big Ten with their new deal, right? It's going to be for a 16-team league. $80 million in TV rights per school. Here's the problem, John. Now they have 18 teams. So now they're not even getting the full 80. Yes, you'll still get more than you would if you were still in the Pac-12, but I don't understand it. Anyways, back to my previous point. If you're Wazoo, if you're a fan of Wazoo, how do you accept that you are no longer part of a Power 5 institution? Like, nope, sorry. You went down. When we look at James Madison, who is an FCS power, and they get the bump up to the group of 5, like it's more common that you get the bump up. You don't hardly ever hear of you're getting the bump down and you're going to accept it and be okay with it. That's the crazy part for me, that there are going to be institutions that have to accept that this is the situation. Like you are moving down in the food chain.
Yeah. But
it happens in the English Premier League. It happens in the English Premier League. It's something completely different in American sports.
But I think that's what happened when I just used that example. It seems like Louisville and schools like Cincinnati, where they were really knocking on the door of being special programs in multiple sports. Then the Big East dissolved and they got lost. But guess what? They were able to earn their way back into the conversation, where now Cincinnati, especially as far as football is concerned, very relevant in the discourse. And we see that Louisville has not been forgotten about. So it can happen. You can do that. It just may take time. And unfortunately, in college sports, players only have 4 years of eligibility, and maybe they won't get to see their fruits of their labor in real time because it's taking so much time for your school to elevate itself back into prominence. But it can happen. It can. And I know so many people are so up in arms. And from a traditionalist standpoint, yeah, it does suck. We lose out on a lot of history with some of these conferences. But at the same time, the game evolves. The sports evolve. Everything changes. The way we consume these sports has changed. It is not the same as it was 15, 20 years ago. Streaming has opened up Pandora's box for that. I don't think, honestly, it's as big of a deal as some people are expressing that it is, as long as you can make sure that there's some equity established among the conferences. Because yeah, if the college football playoff comes around and it's just automatic bids and then 5 SEC teams, maybe that's not the best way to handle it.
What did Jim Irsay say last week? if I was to die tonight and Jonathan Taylor was to be released, the league would still go on.
The league will still go on. The sport will still go on as long as the lights stay on, Mia O'Brien.
Oh, into the darkness we go.
So fantastic. This is so fantastic. The memes, the Aaron Rodgers memes, they are rolling in already, as they should. The Jets and Browns geared up for the fourth quarter of last week's Hall of Fame game in Canton. The lights on one side of Tom Benson Hall of Fame Stadium went out, leaving the Jets and Aaron Rodgers specifically in partial darkness before the team lost 21-16. During the delay, it was a 15-minute delay, the NBC cameras caught the 39-year-old New Jets quarterback on the sidelines, fittingly in the dark, of course, after his darkness retreat. Is this an omen for what is ahead? Because boy, howdy, Mia, you can't come up with a meme more appropriate than this.
I mean, listen,
Look at that. It's amazing.
So I will say this. Having been to a game at Tom Benson Hall of Fame Stadium.
I believe it. It's probably like Tropicana Field where you're hopeful that the power stays on. I get it.
Very much not surprised that happened because, listen, beautiful place, Canton, Ohio, but I was a little underwhelmed by the Hall of Fame festivities. And maybe with the Cleveland Browns being one of the teams, maybe it was a little bit more full, both the Hall of Fame festivities and the downtown. Like, we're talking like the day of, like, you go downtown and it's like a ghost town. I'm like, then somebody's got to like, don't you have to go out to eat? And like,
dude, did you see right before the Hall of Fame inductions, the ceremony was going to start in like 5 minutes and it was like Trump's inauguration. It's just like totally empty.
It makes no sense to me because it's such like a seminal moment that everybody cares about it, and yet no one's there. Maybe it's just because Canton's kind of obscure and hard to get to, although it's only an hour south of Cleveland, but I digress. Aaron Rodgers, the Jets, much like Urban Meyer and the Jacksonville Jaguars, this is either going to end in a dumpster fire or a blaze of glory. There is no in between. It's that simple, John. I do not see a world in which they straddle both lines. Either Aaron Rodgers and this ascending defense are able to be a match made in heaven, and we see a Tom Brady situation, a Peyton Manning to the Broncos situation, or it is just like his predecessor, both in Green Bay and in New York, one Brett Favre, and this ends in utter dismay. And Nathaniel Hackett, for a second straight year, is involved in an absolute just disaster. And poor Robert Saleh, because I think he's actually a halfway decent coach. He's especially a halfway decent defensive coordinator. And so, yeah, it can only go one of two ways. It's that simple.
I want to be wrong. I really do. I want Jets fans to have something go right for them. It's about time. It's been a long road for Jets fans.
Although they think that they're like God's gift to America now that they have Aaron Rodgers. And
I get it. Look, they're excited about something. The team invested and gave them something to be excited about. They've drafted well. They're
aside from Zach Wilson.
That was a different situation, old regime. But
no. Joe Douglas drafted Zach Wilson, but continue.
He wasn't a solid pick, was he?
Yeah, he was.
Oh, he was a solid pick.
He was Saleh's first pick.
I thought that was a year before Saleh.
Nope.
Anyway, regardless, point being here. They are due a break, and I want to be wrong. I have no doubt in my mind this is going to be a disaster.
Woo!
I have no doubt. Here's what's going to happen, Mia. They'll start 3-1. I don't know what the schedule is. I don't have it in front of me. They'll start 3-1.
Pulling up their schedule right now.
And everyone's going to be like, all right, feeling good about this. Then something will happen where Rodgers takes something wrong from a media member, like something is asked and he doesn't take it the right way or doesn't agree with how it's said. That'll turn into a controversy. Then, as I predicted earlier, there will be some sort of a minor injury. Zach Wilson will play. I don't know how well he's going to play, but he'll play. And then it will be towards the end of the season, the Jets will be fighting for a playoff spot. And at the end of the season, they will fall just short.
The schedule really plays into the script. Are you ready for this?
Okay, let's hear it. Yeah.
So they open up the first Monday Night Football game against the Bills. That's an AFC East showdown.
Tough game.
At home on September 11th. So do with that what you will. Then they go to Dallas.
Winnable game.
Home against the Patriots.
Winnable game.
Home against the Chiefs.
Tough game.
But if they're 3-1, everybody's going nuts.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then it happens, John. They have to go to Denver and face Sean Payton and the Broncos, who I also think, for what it's worth, and I've been kind of on the side doing a little investigative reporting.
I think they'll be better. I think they'll be better.
I've been doing some investigative reporting into that situation out there, and it's going to be interesting. That's all I'm going to say.
All right.
Because was Nate Hackett the problem, or was it someone else entirely?
I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, exactly. Then they're home against the Eagles, bye week, at the Giants, who will be frisky. I'm not sure they'll get as many breaks as they did last year, just in terms of the ball bouncing their way. But I think they'll be one. I think they'll be better.
It'll be a tough team.
Yeah, tough team, because that's just the nature of a day ball team. Home against the Chargers, at the Raiders, at the Bills, home against Miami, home against the Falcons, home against the Texans, at Miami, home against Washington, at Cleveland, at New England.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of winnable games on that backstretch, but if you're underperforming or if you're engulfed in controversy, we know how it can be hard to lose track of the ball, right?
But that's where I think they have a pretty tough first 4 or 5 games. And so we're going to think, if they start out 3-1, like, oh my God, this is who they are. And then if injuries happen and the infighting and everything else, and then all of a sudden, if they're sitting there at 8-8, I wouldn't be surprised in the least.
I just think I think Rodgers is going to be a disaster in New York. Not necessarily even by play. He might be totally fine as a player. I don't think he is mentally equipped for that city. And people will sit there and they'll say, oh, the New York media, it's a trope. It's something that's over. It's not, especially football. Every week from September, especially October, until January, February, the NFL leads the New York Post. It leads the Daily News. Aaron Rodgers is going to be all over that every day, and that's going to be unlike anything he's experienced before. And I know the Packers are an institution in their own rights, but it's just different. And I don't think he's going to be used to being under the microscope in the same way that it happened. The whole immunized thing, remember when all that happened?
He would have been ripped apart.
But not even just ripped apart. Remember how it took like weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks for people to figure out what was actually happening? That wouldn't happen in New York. Someone would pick up on that immediately. So that's why I think
the podunk Wisconsin media had no idea.
And I'm not crapping on the media there, but it's just like the way the microscope works in the number one market in the country, it's in the world. I just don't see a way where this is a successful experiment from a totality standpoint. Might it work on the field for a little bit? I hope it does. I really do. But as Ed here says, Rodgers gets his feelings hurt easily. And like in New York, if you get your feelings hurt easily, you don't last.
Do you think he's going to play in any preseason games?
I guess we could talk about the preseason, man.
Yeah, I think he'll play in at least a couple. Let's cut to the chase on this one, John Alba. Give me one reason why we should care about the preseason.
Gives you something to bet on.
Honestly, I watched that Hall of Fame game simply because I wanted to see an offense move up and down the field, and I didn't really see that. But I did kind of a little bit. Shout out to Dorian Thompson-Robinson, but
It cracks me up when I see people on social media getting so invested in a preseason game. And on one hand, I get it. They're so starved for, I'm getting a taste. This feels real. But they'll get so invested in what happens in the game. And I don't know, you can tell me 65 to 70% of the players you're seeing in any given preseason game might not even make the roster.
They might not even be in the NFL in a month.
That's what I'm saying. Right. So.
Right. They may be out of the league. No, I mean, so like from my vantage point, obviously, because I cover an NFL franchise. So like I'm watching the preseason to see certain position battles, to see who is in the pecking order first. In the wide receiver rotation, for example, in Jacksonville, like there's essentially like 1 to 2 potentially spots open on the roster. They're not going to play those first 4 guys all that much because they know who their 1 through 4 are. And so you're just watching to see which young guys get in and maybe flash. But that's because I'm in the weeds. Like most people are not paying attention to the Jags and the Cowboys this weekend and paying attention to what the order of the running back rotation is or what's the offensive line combination. But like, that's the nature of my job. I would say if you're a casual fan, you don't want your starters to be playing because you don't want to risk injury and you don't need to see them do what you know they're going to do in the regular season.
You're quite literally rooting for the shirts on the field.
You're just rooting for no injuries. Like, honestly. So, I mean, like, I'll watch and, like, like, I'll be paying attention to, all right, like, did this kid do anything? Like, did this guy, because especially you can't hit the quarterback in practice and so, all right, well, he has to hold up against his own quarterback in practice, but did he get after somebody else's quarterback? Like that, I'll pay attention to. I know Sean Payton has said that the starters in Denver will play in their first preseason game. Doug Peterson saying today that the Jaguar starters will get 1 to 2 series. Part of that for the Jags, and I think that's an interesting point to bring up too, John, is because, and a staffer brought this up to me, the Jags also have joint practices next week with the Detroit Lions. And so the assumption is they probably won't play their starters next week because they'll already have had like 3 hard days of like going at it with the Lions.
Yeah.
And so that is like a game. And so you give them a game now because you're not going to play them in that third preseason game because no one wants to risk injury.
And when people talk about injuries in the preseason, most injuries happen in camp. They don't even happen in the games themselves. Most of the injuries go down in that feels like 114-degree heat where players are running drills. That's where the tendons are torn and the ligaments are damaged. Hardly even as much in the preseason games themselves. I just think the preseason serves no purpose of being as long as it is. I really feel like there's so much more equity built in camp itself rather than the actual games. So, but it's an opportunity to sell some tickets, I guess. And if you're really craving football, I mean, it'll be better than like the USFL, I guess. I don't know. I'm not crapping on the USFL, but I guess it'll be better than that. Before we get to our Beast of the Week, Mia, we got to get to this one. I've been waiting all week to tee you up on this.
You sent me this one quite some time ago.
This was one of the craziest stories we're ever going to talk about here on Out of Bounds on the Know Your News Network. All right. One of these things is not like the other. Look at where the leader is.
Yep.
And look at where the last place individual is.
Oh, boy.
The chairman of Somalia's National Athletics Federation, has been suspended amid accusations of nepotism after a seemingly untrained female sprinter represented the African country at the World University Games in China and took more than, ready for this, 20 seconds to finish the 100-meter race, far behind her competitors. The Somali Ministry of Youth and Sports released a statement directing the Somalia Olympic Committee to suspend Athletics Federation Chairwoman Khadija Aden Dahir amid allegations that 20-year-old Nasra Abukar, who finished last in the race, as you can see in that picture, was a relative of hers and was given the chance to compete at the games because of her family ties. In her qualifying race, Abukar was immediately left behind the other runners and finished about 10 seconds after the winner. And despite finishing last, she did a little skip in the air as she crossed the finish line. Mia, we've seen a lot of nepotism in sports. You've seen it in the NFL firsthand. Is this the craziest display of nepotism you've ever seen? I couldn't stop laughing when
I just want to note that the 3 runners, like in the middle, though, like they're kind of in the middle of the pack. If they were even further up, this would be even more hilarious.
Oh, yeah.
This would be even more hilarious if they were a little further up. I'll say this much. It gives me hope. I mean, I can run 100 meters in quicker than 20 seconds.
Yeah,
I think so, at least. I hope so. I could run a 40, and I think they time me at like 5'8". So, I mean, I would hope I can. Well, I just hope that there are actual like athletes that can run faster in Somalia, because if it's not nepotism,
they're generally a very good run.
Right. We've got some bigger issues if you couldn't find somebody else to run.
It's just, I mean, I've never in my life seen anything more evident than that. That's like when you are playing rec basketball. Okay. And one of the players' dads is the coach. And the player, I won't even say rec, I'll say all-star, like AAU basketball. And the player's dad is the coach, and that player is so much worse than everyone else on the team, but they're playing because of the player's kid, the coach's kid. I don't think in organized, nearly professional or professional competition I've ever seen anything like that. I was laughing. So you got to watch this video if you haven't seen this video. This girl is so far behind everyone else, and they take off out of the gates. It was like if I had my grandmother run the race. I couldn't believe what I saw.
Did you see Tim Tebow play tight end for the Jaguars?
I did. There's no way it was as bad as that. There's no way.
At least Tim was in good shape.
There's just
Tim
no.
would have run. Tim would have run the 100-meter dash in under 20 seconds.
I would sure as hell hope so.
In terms of blocking, maybe not so much, but
I mean, to each their own, I suppose, on that. All right, Mia, it's time for the beast of the week. What are we calling the most beastly thing that we saw in the sports world this week?
I am actually going to circle back to our U.S. women's national team. And needless to say, not someone on the U.S. team, but instead Sweden's goalkeeper. I want to make sure I say her name right because I definitely won't. Zecira Musovic. Because let me tell you, like, certainly the United States was, not the goal scoring threat that they once were in these World Cup games. But she was an all-star. She was an MVP. I'm actually trying to figure out how many saves she had. I know obviously in the PKs, the U.S. kind of, shot themselves in the foot more than once with Megan Rapinoe and Sophia Smith both missing PKs. But 11 saves for the 27-year-old goalkeeper. She just came up huge in this one. And as much as we want to talk about the U.S. blowing it, the reality is that as a goalie myself back in my day, I do have a soft spot for when a keeper is able to put on a display like that. So hopefully, best of luck against Japan in the quarterfinals. And we forget, John, Sweden was a perennial power in the mid-90s and early 2000s in women's soccer. So perhaps they can recapture some of that magic.
I am so reluctant to go with this one, but I have to because it was undeniable how crazy this weekend was for these guys. And that is for Jake Paul and Logan.
Oh, God.
Jake Paul defeats Nate Diaz via unanimous decision in what will probably go down as one of the most purchased boxing events this year, if not the most. And they sold out the crowd there. Earlier in the night, Logan Paul, who, by the way, if you haven't noticed this or heard about this, is like one of the best professional wrestlers in the world out of nowhere.
What do we make of the Paul brothers?
I mean, I can't stand them, but
neither can I.
They're
That's why
so
I'm like
good at what they
eyes.
do. That's what bothers me. They're so
They literally
good.
got famous during COVID for being YouTube stars,
But
and now parlayed it into athletic careers.
They're so good at knowing how to reach people's emotions and fuel fire into money. I mean, Logan Paul opens up SummerSlam, which is the second biggest show of the year for WWE, has this insane match to start it off. And yes, that's scripted, but he was fantastic in it. He hops on a private jet from Detroit and gets to the building for Jake Paul's fight in time, still in his gear, and then sees his brother beat Nate Diaz in a shoot boxing match because if you call that boxing, though, that was what it was. But these guys know what they're doing, and they know how to make a whole hell of a lot of money doing it. I have no love lost for them, but it's undeniable, Mia. They are my beasts of the week.
Anybody can be a professional athlete. I'm just kidding, because look at our friend in Somalia.
Yes, exactly. This has been Out of Bounds. We will be back with you next week right here on the Know Your News Network. We'll see you next time.